The unexpected encounter. The sun was just beginning its descent, casting a warm amber glow over the quiet streets as Jason Winters clocked out from his shift at Thompson's auto shop. Covered in oil stains and smelling faintly of gasoline, he was the picture of a man who poured every ounce of himself into his work. Jason had a reputation around town as the miracle mechanic, able to fix even the most hopeless-looking cars with a patience and skill unmatched by anyone else. But today had been particularly long, and he was feeling every minute of it. All he could think of as he started his old truck was the comfort of home, a hearty dinner his wife would have waiting, and the laughter of his 2 young sons clamoring to tell him about their day. Jason took a deep breath, savoring the thought. It was a simple life, but one he'd worked hard to build and was proud of. As he made his way down the winding road home, something caught his eye. Ahead on the shoulder, a sleek black sedan sat with its hazard lights flashing, and a woman stood beside it, her hands on her hips, peering under the raised hood. She was well-dressed, her business suit a sharp contrast to the dusty roadside setting, and her face held an expression of pure frustration mixed with the helplessness of being stranded. Jason's first thought was to keep driving. After all, it had been a grueling day, and he was more than ready to call it quits. But as he passed by, he caught a glimpse of her face. A mix of worry and exasperation radiated from her, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she needed his help. With a sigh, he pulled his truck over to the side and got out, the gravel crunching under his boots as he approached her. "Looks like you're having some trouble," he called out, offering a friendly smile. The woman looked up, relief evident in her eyes, though a hint of apprehension remained. "Oh, you have no idea. The car just stopped. I was on my way to my mother's birthday dinner. She's turning 65 today, and I promised I'd be there early to help set things up," she explained, running a hand through her hair in frustration. Jason nodded sympathetically. "Well, you're in luck. I happen to be a mechanic." He reached out a hand. "Name's Jason." "Alyssa," she replied, giving his hand a quick shake, though she looked surprised at his appearance. Jason's work attire was a stark contrast to her sophisticated look, but she was in no position to judge. Jason glanced under the hood, his experienced eyes scanning for the telltale signs of trouble. "Let's take a look. Could be something simple." Alyssa watched him work, her worry gradually replaced by curiosity. "Do you do this often?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Help people on the side of the road." "Only if I have to," Jason chuckled. "But fixing cars? All day, every day. I've been at it since I was a kid. Grew up around cars. My dad was a mechanic too. Guess it just runs in the family." "Sounds like you found your calling," she replied, genuinely interested. Not everyone's lucky enough to do something they're passionate about. Jason paused, thinking about her words. He'd never quite looked at it that way. For him, fixing cars wasn't just a job. It was an extension of who he was, a way to serve people, even if it meant grease-stained hands and aching muscles at the end of the day. "Yeah, I guess you're right," he said thoughtfully before turning back to her car. "Ah, here it is. Just a loose connection. Easy fix." Jason fished a wrench out of his toolbox, tightening a bolt here and there. In no time, he had the car humming back to life. Alyssa's face lit up with relief. "You really are a lifesaver, Jason. I don't know what I would have done without you." "Glad I could help," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's a small fix, no need for payment." Alyssa shook her head, incredulous. "Please, let me at least give you something for your trouble. You just saved my evening. This dinner is a big deal for my family." Jason held up his hand, a humble smile on his face. "Like I said, it was no trouble. Besides, helping people out, it's kind of why I got into this work in the first place." Alyssa hesitated, clearly unused to people refusing her offers. She rummaged through her purse and pulled out a business card, holding it out to him. "Fine, but at least take my card. If you ever need anything." anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. You might be surprised at what I can do." Jason took the card and glanced at it. Alyssa Cole, Senior Vice President, Cole and Barron Holdings. The name was familiar. He'd read about the firm in the papers. It was one of the largest investment firms in the region, and Alyssa's name carried considerable weight in business circles. He tucked the card into his pocket, not giving it much thought. "Well, you're all set now, Alyssa. Make sure to check that connection regularly. And drive safe," he advised as she climbed back into her car. As she drove away, Jason stood by the roadside, watching her taillights fade into the evening. He smiled to himself, feeling a quiet satisfaction in knowing he'd helped someone. For him, that was enough. But as he climbed back into his truck and headed home, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this encounter. Later that night, as he sat at the dinner table recounting the story to his wife and kids, they laughed at the randomness of it all. "Well, you never know who you're going to meet on the road," his wife remarked, giving him an affectionate smile. Jason shrugged, brushing it off as just another day in his life. But as he lay in bed that night, sleep eluding him, a strange sense of anticipation filled his mind. Jason couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he sensed that this wasn't the last he'd hear of Alyssa Cole. A call that changes everything. The morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Jason's small bedroom, casting a soft glow across the room. It was a peaceful moment, a quiet Saturday morning where his family was still fast asleep. Jason slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake his wife, and made his way to the kitchen. The rhythmic sound of the coffee maker humming filled the room, grounding him in the familiar routine of his day. As he poured himself a steaming cup, his phone vibrated on the counter, jolting him from his thoughts. He frowned, glancing at the unknown number on the screen. It was unusual to get calls this early, especially from numbers he didn't recognize. Shrugging, he picked it up. "Hello, this is Jason," he greeted, his voice a bit gruff from sleep. "Mr. Jason Winters," a calm, authoritative voice responded. "This is Edward Grant, calling on behalf of Ms. Alyssa Cole." Jason was immediately alert. Alyssa Cole. His mind raced back to the previous night, recalling the stranded woman by the side of the road. He'd thought that was the end of it. A chance encounter with no strings attached. Why would she be calling him now? "Yes, that's me," Jason replied cautiously. "Is there something wrong with the car?" No, Edward replied with a chuckle. "In fact, Miss Cole asked me to reach out to you personally to convey her gratitude. She mentioned that your help last night meant a great deal to her, especially given the urgency of her situation." Jason smiled to himself, though he was still puzzled. "That's very kind of her. I was just glad to help. No need for all this formality." "Ah, but Mr. Winters, that's exactly why Miss Cole wants to see you again," Edward continued smoothly. "She believes that people like you, those who help without expecting anything in return, are rare. She insists that she thank you properly. Would you be available for lunch today?" Jason nearly dropped his coffee cup. Lunch, with someone like Alyssa Cole. He had never been invited to anything remotely formal in his life. He fumbled for a response, his mind racing with doubt. What would he even wear? What would he talk about? That's very unexpected," he stammered. "I'm not sure what to say. I didn't do anything special." "Perhaps that's why Miss Cole finds it so remarkable," Edward replied, his tone hinting at a smile. "But please, don't feel pressured. Miss Cole merely thought it would be a good opportunity to thank you. She mentioned she'd appreciate hearing more about your work, and maybe even a bit about yourself." Jason hesitated. He wasn't one for fancy outings, but he had to admit, a part of him was curious. Maybe it would just be a quick lunch and a polite thank you. It couldn't hurt to accept, could it? "All right, I suppose I can do that," he said, finally making up his mind. "Where should I meet her?" "Wonderful. I'll arrange for a car to pick you up from your home at noon," Edward replied, sounding pleased. "It'll take you to one of Ms. Cole's favorite spots. She's quite looking forward to it. After ending the call, Jason stood there, holding his phone with a dazed expression. He'd grown up in a modest town, where his closest brushes with wealth were glimpses of fancy cars passing by on the main street. Lunch with someone of Alyssa's status was a first. As he sipped his coffee, his wife Lisa wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes and yawning. "You're up early," she mumbled, reaching for a mug herself. "Everything all right?" Jason looked at her, still processing the call. "Remember that woman I helped last night? The one with the fancy car?" Lisa nodded, her interest piqued. "The one who was going to her mother's birthday party?" "Yeah, that's her. Apparently, she wants to have lunch with me today," he said, the disbelief still evident in his voice. Lisa's eyes widened. "Lunch? With her? That's... Jason, that's amazing. She must really appreciate what you did." "I guess so. Feels a bit over the top, though, don't you think?" he replied, scratching his head. "I just did what anyone else would have done." Lisa shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not everyone would stop on the side of the road after a long day at work. You always put others before yourself, Jason. Maybe this is her way of showing she sees that." They spent the next hour talking about what he should wear, Lisa fussing over him as if he were preparing for a grand occasion. By the time the car arrived at noon, Jason looked about as polished as he ever would, wearing his cleanest shirt and freshly polished shoes. The car, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, looked wildly out of place outside their modest home. As he settled into the plush leather seat, Jason couldn't help but feel out of place. The drive took them to the heart of the city, and before he knew it, he was standing outside an elegant restaurant he'd never even imagined entering. The large glass doors reflected a version of himself he barely recognized, a small-town mechanic in a world far removed from his own. Inside, he was greeted by Edward, a well-dressed man with an air of professionalism that made Jason even more self-conscious. Edward guided him to a private section of the restaurant where Alyssa was already waiting. She looked effortlessly poised, a warm smile on her face as she stood to greet him. "Jason, I'm so glad you came," Alyssa said, extending her hand. "Thank you again for what you did last night. I know I said it before, but it really meant a lot to me." Jason shook her hand, feeling his face heat up slightly. "It was no problem, really. Just part of the job, you know." Alyssa smiled, gesturing for him to sit. "That's what makes it so rare. So many people would have just driven by. But you stopped, and you helped. That's something I don't take lightly." The two of them began to talk, and as they did, Jason found himself feeling surprisingly comfortable. Alyssa asked about his work, his family, and how he'd gotten into the auto repair business. Jason shared stories of his father's shop, of growing up around tools and engines, and the satisfaction he found in helping people get back on the road. Alyssa listened intently, her attention unwavering. "You know, Jason, people like you are the backbone of this community," she said earnestly. "I run a large company, sure, but I often feel disconnected from what really matters. Hearing your story reminds me of the importance of community." Jason was flattered but unsure of how to respond. "Thank you, Miss Cole. I'm just a regular guy trying to make a living." Alyssa smiled, shaking her head. "I disagree. People like you are far from ordinary." Lunch continued, filled with stories, laughter, and an easy camaraderie that surprised them both. As they finished their meal, Alyssa leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Jason, I have a proposal for you. You have a skill set that's invaluable, not just in fixing cars, but in building connections. Have you ever thought of starting your own auto shop?" Jason was taken aback, his heart skipping a beat. "Of course I have," he admitted. "It's been a dream of mine for years. But it's expensive, and I don't have the funds." Alyssa's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Well, maybe we can change that. I'd like to help you. Think of it as an investment, not just in your dream, but in something that makes a difference." Jason's mind reeled. Could this really be happening? His modest life had never prepared him for something like this. Yet here he was, sitting across from a woman who saw potential in him, offering a chance he'd only ever dreamed of. "Are you serious?" he managed to say, barely able to believe his own words. Alyssa nodded, a gentle smile on her face. "Completely serious. You helped me, and now I'd like to help you. I think we could build something incredible together." Jason stared at her, his heart pounding. The world he knew was changing right before his eyes, opening up in ways he never imagined. And all because of a simple act of kindness. The weight of a dream. Jason walked through the front door of his modest home that evening, still reeling from his lunch with Alyssa Cole. Her offer hung in his mind like a tantalizing mirage, both thrilling and intimidating. Alyssa had promised to support his dream of opening an auto shop, but the reality of that prospect felt too enormous to grasp. "Dad, you're home." His oldest son, Connor, greeted him, running over with arms wide open. Jason grinned, bending down to scoop up his son. "How's my little man? Did you have a good day?" Connor nodded vigorously. "Mom took us to the park, and I raced on the slides. I almost went as fast as a race car." "That's my boy," Jason said, chuckling as he set Connor down and tousled his hair. He felt the familiar warmth of home wrap around him, grounding him in the life he knew so well. As much as the idea of a new venture excited him, he also felt the heavy responsibility of providing for his family. What if he took the risk and failed? It wasn't just his dream on the line. It was their future, too. In the kitchen, Lisa was preparing dinner, humming softly to herself. Jason stepped in, watching her with a soft smile, momentarily taken aback by how much he loved this life. She looked up, noticing his pensive expression. "Hey, everything okay?" she asked, pausing to brush a strand of hair out of her face. Jason hesitated, not wanting to overwhelm her with the gravity of Alyssa's offer. But he knew he couldn't keep it to himself. "Remember that lunch with Alyssa Cole?" "Of course," Lisa replied, her interest immediately piqued. "How did it go?" "It was different," he began, leaning against the counter. "She's not just grateful. She actually wants to help me start my own auto shop. She said she'd fund the entire thing." Lisa's eyes widened, her hands frozen in midair as she processed his words. "Wait, she wants to invest in your dream. Just like that?" Jason nodded, feeling the weight of it all over again as he saw the astonishment in her face. "Yeah, just like that. She said it was an investment, but she made it clear that she believes in me. I've wanted this for so long, Lisa, but I'm afraid. What if I can't pull it off?" Lisa set down the knife she'd been holding, turning to face him fully. "Jason, you've been talking about opening your own shop since we first met. You're the best mechanic in town. If anyone can do this, it's you." Her words filled him with a warmth he hadn't realized he needed, but doubt still gnawed at him. "But what if things go wrong? We'd be taking on a huge risk. Our whole life would change, Lisa. We've never had a lot, but we've always managed to get by." Lisa reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Jason, I'd watched you work late hours, always giving your best, no matter how exhausted you are. If Alyssa sees what I see, then maybe this is a chance worth taking. The boys and I will be right here, supporting you. We believe in you." Jason took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. The enormity of the decision was still daunting, but with Lisa's support, it felt a little less terrifying. Her unwavering confidence in him bolstered his own, giving him the courage to seriously consider saying yes to Alyssa. That night, as he lay in bed, Jason's mind swirled with visions of the shop he could create. He pictured the sign, "Winter's Auto Repair," hanging above a garage filled with tools he'd always dreamed of owning. He imagined customers from all over the city coming to him, just like they did at Thompson's. But this time, it would be his shop, his reputation, his chance to make something truly his own. The following day, he called Alyssa, his heart pounding as he dialed her number. "Jason, I was hoping to hear from you. she answered, her voice warm and friendly. "I've thought it over, Alyssa," he began, his nerves evident in his voice. "And I'm in. I want to take this chance." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a delighted laugh. "That's wonderful, Jason. I'm thrilled. I have a few ideas already, but I'd love for you to come by my office this week so we can map everything out together." The conversation went on for several minutes, during which Alyssa outlined her vision for his new business. She spoke of things like branding, customer outreach, and even online marketing, all things Jason had never considered before. While her business jargon was overwhelming, her enthusiasm was contagious. By the end of the call, Jason felt both invigorated and slightly intimidated. This was happening. He was really going to do this. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Jason spent his evenings at the kitchen table, poring over business plans Alyssa's team had helped him draft, reviewing potential locations, and researching suppliers. Every decision felt monumental, and he often found himself second-guessing things. But Alyssa remained a steadying presence, guiding him through each step, encouraging him to trust his instincts. One evening, she even arranged for him to visit the property she had in mind for his shop, a small but prime spot on the edge of the business district. When Jason saw the space, his heart swelled with pride and excitement. It wasn't large, but it had potential, and he could already envision the transformation. Lisa came with him to see the space, her eyes widening as she looked around the empty garage. "This is really happening," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Jason, this is incredible." Jason felt a lump in his throat as he looked around, imagining the future. It was incredible, but it was also terrifying. They were pouring everything into this dream, and failure wasn't an option. One Friday afternoon, after finalizing some paperwork, Jason felt a surge of energy and took his family to a nearby diner to celebrate. As they laughed over milkshakes and burgers, Jason felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The weight of uncertainty was still there, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that everything might actually work out. Over the following days, contractors moved in to start renovations, and Jason spent hours at the site, overseeing every detail. It was both exhausting and exhilarating to see his vision come to life. One evening, as he was sweeping up dust and debris, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Alyssa standing there, a warm smile on her face. "Thought I'd stop by and see how things are going," she said, her eyes sparkling as she looked around the bustling construction site. Jason grinned, pride evident in his expression. "It's coming along. Still a lot of work to do, but it's starting to feel real." Alyssa nodded thoughtfully. "It's impressive, Jason. You've poured so much of yourself into this, and it shows. You're building something special here." Jason felt a surge of gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Alyssa. Your belief in me, it's changed everything." Alyssa smiled, her voice soft. "It's easy to believe in someone who lives with integrity. You earned this, Jason. I'm just glad to be part of it." As Alyssa walked away, Jason felt a newfound resolve settle within him. This wasn't just about an auto shop anymore. It was about creating a legacy, something he could pass on to his kids, something that would outlast him. Every late night, every decision, and every worry felt worth it, because he knew he was building a better future. By the end of the week, the renovations were nearly complete, and Jason had officially ordered his signage: Winter's Auto Repair. He couldn't wait to see it hanging above the entrance, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. But just as he was beginning to settle into this new reality, a strange envelope arrived at his doorstep. Inside was a handwritten letter, brief and unsigned. "Thank you for your kindness. We will be watching." Jason stared at the words, a chill running down his spine. Who had sent this? And what did it mean? Shadows of doubt. Jason sat alone at the kitchen table that night, the strange letter spread out in front of him, its cryptic message etched into his mind. "Thank you for your kindness. We will be watching." He couldn't shake the unsettling feeling it gave him. The words were polite enough, almost appreciative, but the idea of someone watching him left a gnawing pit in his stomach. He tried to shrug it off, telling himself it was likely a joke from a customer or someone who admired his story. After all, Alyssa's involvement in his new shop had brought a bit of local fame his way, and he was already getting attention from people he'd never met before. "Everything all right?" Lisa asked, walking into the kitchen and noticing his pensive expression. Jason forced a smile, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. "Yeah, just thinking. I've got a lot on my mind with the shop opening soon." Lisa took a seat beside him, placing her hand on his. "You know, it's okay to feel nervous. This is a big step, and you've worked so hard to get here." "I know," Jason replied, squeezing her hand. He hesitated, wondering if he should tell her about the letter, but he decided against it. He didn't want to worry her, especially with everything they were juggling already. Over the next few days, Jason threw himself into the final preparations for winter's auto repair. The sign went up, a bold declaration of his new reality, and he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as he watched it being mounted above the shop's entrance. The building had come together beautifully, with a fresh coat of paint, shining new tools, and a spacious work area. It was everything he'd dreamed of. But as the grand opening approached, Jason couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He would catch glimpses of strangers lingering outside the shop longer than usual, or see an unfamiliar car parked across the street. He told himself it was just his nerves. After all, the shop was drawing a lot of attention, especially since it was backed by Alyssa Cole. People were curious, and he was simply being paranoid. The night before the grand opening, Jason was alone in the shop, going over last-minute details. He meticulously checked every piece of equipment, ensuring everything was in place for the big day. The anticipation was electric, but so was his anxiety. As he was locking up, he heard a soft knock on the front door. Startled, he turned to see Alyssa standing there, a smile on her face, her silhouette softened by the glow of the streetlights. Jason opened the door, a surprised but warm smile on his face. "Alyssa, what are you doing here so late?" he asked, gesturing for her to come in. "I wanted to see the place before the crowds came in tomorrow," she replied, looking around with admiration. "Jason, this is incredible. You've done a beautiful job." Jason felt a surge of pride at her words. "Thank you, Alyssa. I still can't believe this is happening." Alyssa studied him for a moment, her smile fading slightly. "You look worried. Is everything okay?" Jason hesitated, debating whether to share his concerns. But something about Alyssa's genuine concern encouraged him to open up. "I've been feeling uneasy lately, like I'm being watched. It's probably just nerves, but it's been getting to me." Alyssa's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Watched? What do you mean?" Jason pulled out the folded letter from his pocket and handed it to her. Alyssa read it, her brows knitting together as she processed the words. "This is strange. Do you think it could be someone you've helped in the past?" Jason shook his head. "I don't know. I mean, I've always tried to help people whenever I can. But this feels different. I don't know why, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just a thank you note." Alyssa looked him in the eyes, her expression serious. "Well, if you ever feel threatened, please don't hesitate to reach out. I can help, or I could even get security involved. I have contacts who could look into this for you." Jason felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Alyssa. I appreciate that. I'll let you know if it gets worse." They chatted for a while longer, and Alyssa left after assuring him that he could rely on her if he needed anything. As he watched her car disappear down the street, Jason felt a little more reassured, though the shadows of doubt still lingered. The next morning, the shop was buzzing with excitement. Friends, family, and curious locals crowded around Winter's Auto Repair for the grand opening, congratulating Jason and admiring the shop. There was a ribbon-cutting ceremony, complete with local reporters who had come to document the event. Jason felt like he was in a dream, standing there with Lisa and the kids, smiling for photos and thanking everyone for their support. Throughout the day, customers brought in their cars, and Jason's schedule quickly filled up with repair jobs. He worked tirelessly, fueled by adrenaline and excitement, each customer interaction adding to his growing sense of accomplishment. This was his dream, fully realized, and he was living it. But amidst the joy, Jason couldn't ignore the occasional strange glances he received from certain customers. A few people lingered in the shop longer than necessary, watching him with an intensity that left him uncomfortable. One man, in particular, seemed unusually interested, hovering near the entrance and observing every move Jason made. When Jason approached him, the man simply smiled and said, "I'm just looking around. Impressive place you have here." But something in his tone sent a chill down Jason's spine. That evening, after closing up, Jason sat in the empty shop, staring at the now quiet space. His dream had finally come true, but the fear that had settled in his mind was growing stronger. The thought of someone watching him no longer seemed like a mere coincidence. Deciding he couldn't ignore it any longer, he called Alyssa, who answered almost immediately. "Jason, is everything okay?" "No, not really," he admitted, feeling a mix of relief and fear as he finally spoke his concerns aloud. "Today was incredible, but I keep getting this feeling that someone's watching me." There were people here who didn't seem like regular customers. One man kept staring, and he wouldn't leave until I asked him directly if he needed help. Alyssa was silent for a moment, considering his words. "Jason, I think you should take this seriously. I'll have someone look into it discreetly. Just hang tight, and please don't confront anyone if you feel unsafe. Let me handle it." Jason agreed, though he still felt uneasy. He trusted Alyssa, but the idea of needing someone to look into his life made him feel vulnerable in a way he hadn't anticipated. The next few days passed quietly, with the shop bustling and business booming. Jason began to relax, almost convincing himself that the strange encounters had just been his imagination. But then, one night as he was locking up, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its engine was off, but the headlights were pointed directly at his shop. Jason squinted, trying to see inside, but the windows were tinted. Just as he was about to approach, the SUV's lights flickered, and it sped away, disappearing into the night. Jason stood there, heart pounding, realizing that this was no coincidence. Someone was indeed watching him. The next morning, as he sat in his office, trying to push the events from his mind, he received an unexpected call. "Mr. Winters," a gruff voice spoke on the other end. "Let this be a reminder. There are consequences to meddling where you don't belong." The line went dead, leaving Jason in stunned silence. His hand shook as he set the phone down, the threat echoing in his mind. His dream shop, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a target, and he had no idea why. The unveiling of secrets. Jason sat in his office, gripping the edge of his desk, his mind spinning. The threat echoed in his head, chilling him to the core. There are consequences to meddling where you don't belong. He hadn't meddled in anything. He'd only helped Alyssa when her car broke down. How could something so simple lead to this? His thoughts turned to his family, a sudden fear gripping him. Whoever these people were, they meant business. Taking a deep breath, Jason picked up his phone and dialed Alyssa's number. After a few rings, she answered, her tone warm and unassuming. "Jason, how's everything going at the shop?" He hesitated, glancing out his office window to ensure no one was watching. "Alyssa, we need to talk. There's something serious going on." The concern in her voice was immediate. "What happened? Are you all right?" "Not really," Jason admitted, keeping his voice low. "I got another call today, a threat. Someone said there'd be consequences if I meddled. I don't know what they're talking about, but it's getting worse. Just last night, a black SUV was parked outside the shop, watching me. When I went to confront them, they sped off. Alyssa was silent for a moment, her tone shifting to something cold and calculating when she finally spoke. "Jason, I didn't want to involve you in this, but it seems that I have no choice now. This is more complicated than I initially let on." Jason's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? I thought this was just about me helping you with your car." Alyssa sighed, the weight of her hesitation evident even over the phone. "Jason, the truth is, my family has been under scrutiny by certain entities for years. My father's business dealings were vast, spanning multiple countries and industries, some of which have garnered unwanted attention. When I inherited part of his business, I thought I'd close all those doors. But it seems like they've opened again, especially now that I'm investing in people outside my usual circles." Jason felt a chill. "So, you're saying helping you made me a target?" "Not directly," Alyssa explained. "But you've gotten tangled up in something larger than either of us anticipated. Whoever these people are, they think you're more involved in my affairs than you are. They're likely watching your shop, and even your home." Jason's jaw clenched as a wave of anger and frustration surged within him. He had worked tirelessly for this opportunity, and now, because of some invisible force from Alyssa's past, his life was being upended. "Alyssa, I don't know what to do. My family's safety comes first. If this means I have to walk away, then I will." "I understand, Jason," Alyssa replied, her voice heavy. "But please, before you make any decisions, let me help you. I have contacts who can ensure your safety and investigate who's behind these threats." Jason sighed, torn between wanting to trust her and the instinct to shield his family from any further danger. "All right, but if it gets any worse, I'm done. I can't put my family through this." "Understood," Alyssa said firmly. "I'll arrange for a security detail to monitor your shop discreetly, and I'll assign a private investigator to look into the threats. You won't have to deal with this alone." They ended the call, and though Alyssa's assurances provided some comfort, Jason's mind remained restless. The reality of the situation hit him like a hammer. He had risked everything to make this dream a reality, and now he was caught in a web of secrets and threats that seemed to grow darker by the day. That night, Jason struggled to sleep, every creak of the house and rustle outside fueling his paranoia. He couldn't shake the image of strangers lurking outside, watching his family. He was exhausted by the time morning came, but he forced himself to get up and head to the shop, determined not to let this shadow of fear keep him from doing his work. At the shop, business continued as usual. Customers came and went, and Jason did his best to focus on repairs, trying to push the threats out of his mind. But halfway through the morning, he noticed a man lingering by the entrance, watching him with an unsettling intensity. Dressed in a dark suit and sunglasses, the man had an air of authority, his gaze never wavering as Jason worked. Finally, Jason couldn't take it any longer. He set down his tools and approached the stranger. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady but tense. The man smirked, his expression unreadable. "Just admiring your work, Mr. Winters. I hear you're one of the best in town." Jason narrowed his eyes. "If you're not here for car repairs, then I'd appreciate it if you left. I don't appreciate being watched." The man's smirk widened, as if he were amused by Jason's defiance. "Careful, Mr. Winters. There are people in this world with more influence than you realize. Best not to get involved in matters beyond your understanding." Jason clenched his fists, struggling to keep his temper in check. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't know what you think I've done, but I want no part of it." The man chuckled, turning to leave. "Good choice. Let's hope you stick to it." As he walked away, Jason felt a mix of anger and dread settling in his chest. He didn't understand why these people were targeting him. But one thing was clear. They wanted him to back off. The question was, from what? Later that day, Alyssa's private investigator, a man named Carson, arrived at the shop. He was calm and professional, introducing himself with a reassuring smile. "Mr. Winters, I'll be handling the investigation on behalf of Miss Cole." Rest assured, we'll do everything we can to get to the bottom of this." Jason led Carson to his office, recounting the details of the strange encounters, including the SUV, the threatening call, and the letter. Carson listened carefully, taking notes, his face expressionless but attentive. "Based on what you've told me, it sounds like whoever's behind this wants to intimidate you into backing away from Miss Cole's offer," Carson said once Jason finished speaking. "It's not uncommon for influential people to have enemies who go to great lengths to keep their business dealings exclusive." Jason shook his head, frustrated. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't have any secrets or connections. This is supposed to be a chance for me to build a future for my family, and now it feels like a trap." Carson gave him a reassuring look. "I understand, Mr. Winters. These situations can be overwhelming. But let me be clear. People like Alyssa Cole don't extend offers like this lightly. She believes in you. And so should you. I'll be in touch, and we'll keep a close eye on things. In the meantime, if you receive any more threats, call me immediately." After Carson left, Jason felt a sliver of relief, though his worries were far from over. He spent the remainder of the day on edge, glancing out the window periodically, expecting the black SUV or another ominous figure to appear. But as evening approached, the streets remained quiet, and he allowed himself to relax, if only slightly. At home that night, he tried to explain the situation to Lisa without alarming her. She listened, her face etched with concern, but she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Jason, you've always been the one to help others," she said softly. "Now you need to let others help you. Trust in Alyssa and this investigator. We'll get through this together." Her words soothed him, if only temporarily, and he was grateful to have her by his side. Yet, as he lay in bed that night, he couldn't help but think of the unknown threat lurking in the shadows. The realization that he might have put his family in harm's way haunted him, filling him with guilt and fear. The next day, he received another envelope at the shop. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in stark, bold letters. "Last warning, Winters." Jason's hands shook as he read the message, his heart pounding in his chest. The message was clear. These people meant business, and they weren't going to back down. Driven by a surge of determination and anger, he called Carson immediately. "I got another message. They're telling me it's my last warning." Carson's voice was calm but serious. "Stay put, Jason. I'll be there soon. We'll figure this out." As Jason ended the call, he steeled himself, vowing to protect his family and his dream no matter what it took. He wouldn't let these faceless threats dictate his future, and he was ready to confront whatever shadows were lurking in the background. A confrontation and a new beginning. The tension in Jason's shop was almost tangible as he waited for Carson to arrive. The weight of the latest threat hung heavily in his mind. Last warning, Winters. It was the culmination of the strange occurrences that had plagued him since he helped Alyssa on that quiet evening. His heart pounded with anticipation, his body tensing at every sound, every shadow that moved outside the windows. When Carson finally arrived, he entered the shop with an air of calm professionalism, carrying a black leather briefcase and wearing an expression that said he'd handled situations far worse than this. He shook Jason's hand firmly. "Jason, I've been doing some digging since we last spoke," Carson began, opening his briefcase to reveal a small file. "What I found has helped to explain what's happening. This is connected to a specific group from Ms. Cole's past, people who believe they should have exclusive control over her business dealings and assets. It seems they've gotten wind of her investment in you, and they view you as a threat." Jason frowned, trying to process Carson's words. "But I'm just a mechanic. How could I possibly be a threat to them?" "It's more about perception," Carson explained, his voice steady. "These people have been in Alyssa's circle for years, benefiting from her father's business dealings. Now, with Alyssa steering her investments toward different, more community-focused projects, they're feeling cut off. They're not worried about your skills as a mechanic, Jason. They're worried that Alyssa's actions will set a precedent, supporting regular people instead of wealthy investors. Jason clenched his fists, a wave of anger washing over him. The idea that people would go to such lengths to control Alyssa's investments, to threaten him and his family simply because he'd been offered an opportunity, was infuriating. So what do we do now? I can't keep living in fear, Carson. I have a family to protect. Carson's gaze hardened, and he placed a reassuring hand on Jason's shoulder. That's exactly what we're going to do. Ms. Cole has already approved some additional security measures. My team has pinpointed a possible meeting place for these people. If we can meet with them and make it clear that you're not a threat, we might be able to put an end to this. Jason nodded, feeling the surge of determination. He would confront whoever was behind these threats and put an end to this nightmare. He wasn't the type to back down, especially when his family's safety was on the line. Later that evening, Carson arranged for Jason to be picked up and brought to a quiet, upscale restaurant on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place frequented by those with influence and power, a setting carefully chosen to give the impression of a civil meeting, even if the matters at hand were anything but. When they arrived, Carson led Jason through the restaurant to a private room at the back. There, seated at a large mahogany table, were three men in tailored suits. Their eyes assessed Jason with cool indifference, barely acknowledging him as Carson introduced them by name, though Jason suspected they were pseudonyms. One of the men, a tall figure with sharp, calculating eyes, spoke first. "Mr. Winters, I understand you're here to discuss matters related to Ms. Cole's recent ventures." Jason met his gaze, unwilling to show fear. "I'm here to find out why I've been threatened simply for accepting a business opportunity. You've made my life hell, following me, leaving letters, calling my home. I have a family to protect, and I won't tolerate this any longer." The man's lips curved into a thin smile. "Direct. I'll give you that, Mr. Winters. But you see, Miss Cole's choices have consequences. She's diverging from her father's legacy, investing in risky, unproven individuals. People like you." Jason's fists tightened under the table. "Unproven. I'm not some corporate player, if that's what you mean, but I've worked hard for everything I have. I didn't ask Alyssa for anything. She made the choice to invest in my shop because she believed in helping her community." The man scoffed, exchanging glances with his companions. "A noble story, Mr. Winters. But we're not interested in noble. We're interested in protecting investments and ensuring stability. Alyssa's decisions are questionable at best." Jason leaned forward, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Threatening people, stalking them, trying to intimidate them. That's stability to you. I'm not backing down. If you think you can scare me out of this opportunity, you're mistaken." The second man, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his tone calm but laced with warning. "We're here to avoid conflict, Mr. Winters. If you walk away now, no harm will come to you or your family. It's that simple." Jason could feel his anger simmering, but he forced himself to remain composed. "I'm not going anywhere. Alyssa saw potential in me, and I'm not about to abandon her support because of some vague threats. If anything happens to me or my family, I'll make sure the authorities know exactly who to look for." The three men exchanged a glance, and for a brief moment, Jason saw something shift in their demeanor. They seemed to realize that their intimidation tactics had failed. The man with the sharp eyes sighed, sitting back in his chair. "Very well, Mr. Winters. Consider this a warning, a final one. We have no desire to involve ourselves with your business any further as long as you maintain discretion about this meeting and your association with Miss Cole." Jason met his gaze, a newfound confidence surging through him. "I'll keep things as professional as they've always been. But if you try to interfere again, I won't hesitate to take action." The men nodded, clearly unimpressed, but no longer interested in pursuing the matter. Carson stood, gesturing for Jason to follow him. They left the restaurant in silence, the night air crisp and cold as they walked back to the car. Once inside, Carson turned to him. "You handled that well, Jason. I don't think they'll bother you again. Their type thrives on fear, but when people like you stand up to them, they tend to back down." Jason let out a long breath, the tension finally starting to drain from his body. "I just want to live my life and run my business. That's all I've ever wanted." Carson smiled. "And now you can." Alyssa will be relieved to know this is over. The following days were a whirlwind as Jason settled back into the routine of running his shop. The threats stopped, the SUV never returned, and the strange lingering figures were nowhere to be seen. He could finally breathe freely, his focus fully on growing Winter's auto repair and serving his community. On a sunny Saturday morning, Alyssa visited the shop. She greeted Jason with a smile, her relief evident. "I heard everything went smoothly with Carson and those acquaintances of my father's." Jason nodded. "They won't be a problem anymore." "Thank you, Alyssa. I don't know how to thank you enough." Alyssa waved a hand dismissively. "You've already done more than enough. I knew you were the right person for this investment, and I'm glad to see you thriving." She glanced around the shop, smiling at the bustling activity and satisfied customers. "This place, it's everything I'd hoped it would be." Jason felt a swell of pride. "It's because of you. Without your support, I wouldn't be here." Alyssa looked him in the eye, her voice warm. "No, Jason. It's because of who you are. You didn't let fear stop you, even when things got tough. That's what makes this place special." As they shared a moment of mutual respect, Jason's heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. He was finally free to pursue his dream without the shadow of fear looming over him. And with Alyssa's unwavering support, he knew that Winter's auto repair was just the beginning. From that day on, Jason poured himself into his work, his business growing and flourishing beyond what he had ever imagined. He became known not only as the best mechanic in town, but as someone who stood by his values and refused to let fear dictate his life. And every day, as he walked into his shop, he was reminded of the incredible journey that had brought him here. A journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness and had changed his life forever.